New to mountain biking? Confused about all the bikes you see in the shop? Or just want to look at some pretty machines? This video is for you. I'm going to break down every major type of mountain bike on the market. What are they built for? What kind of kit should you expect to see them? And where will you be riding them? You may notice that I'm going to stay away from the world of electric mountain bikes. There's a lot of crossover going on, but there's so much other stuff there with motors and batteries, we thought it was going to be a step too far. Handily, I'm here at the Nevis range at the launch of the Saracen and Nevis range partnership, so I've got examples of all these bikes on hand. You too can come along to Nevis range and hire them. Thanks to Saracen for sponsoring this video. Different riders are going to want different types of mountain bike depending largely on the kind of riding you're expecting to do. If you're going to go and ride the downhill course here at Fort William, then you're going to need a very different bike to one if you're going to be riding the trail network, for example. As such, there's a number of different families of mountain bike to serve different needs. Now there are some grey areas, but we're going to block them into these generalised families. We're going to look at cross-country and down-country, trail bikes, enduro bikes, park bikes, downhill bikes and dirt jump bikes as well. While loose at times, the bike's family is generally defined by the suspension travel front and rear and the burliness of the components. There are two types of frames too. There are hardtails, which are rigid at the back but generally have a front suspension fork, and full suspension bikes. They have a front fork and then a linkage and a shock at the rear to help the rear wheel move over bumps. If I talk about suspension figures in this video, then on a hardtail I'm talking about the fork, but on a full sus I'm talking about the rear suspension. At the front, the fork will have about the same or maybe up to 20mm more travel in 99% of cases. Ever seen people dressed in Lycra going extremely fast around a loop course elbow to elbow? Cross-country or XC racing is super exciting and the skills and fitness required to race at the highest level is incredible. They're riding XC bikes. These bikes are built to be as light as possible, with tyres that have a low rolling resistance so that little energy is wasted when covering ground. They tend to have between 80 and 120mm of travel, enough to take the sting out of obstacles, but not so much that excess weight is added. They're also designed to bounce around less when you pedal, known as pedal bob, to keep them efficient. They're amazing machines to cover longer distances and be right at home on your local blue-graded trails, and a hoot on the reds if you take a little bit more care. What about downcountry? These bikes are somewhere between an XC bike and a trail bike, which I'll move on to in a moment. They also feature lower travel figures, 110 to 130mm, and low weight to boost efficiency. We'll also see grippier tyres, more powerful brakes, and geometry figures that are a little bit more forgiving on steeper tracks, to boost fun levels on descents without making climbs a drag. Right then, let's move on to the first of the two most popular families of bikes, the trail bike. Trail bikes like this Saracen Aerial 30 are designed to be super fun when you're winding your way down the mountains, but also perfectly happy pedalling back up to the top. The full suspension trail bike should have a rear suspension system that doesn't bob too much when you're pedalling up the climbs, as that's a waste of energy. Suspension design like this will also help on traverses or gentle descents when you want to put some pedal strokes in to help keep the good times rolling. Trail bikes usually have between 130 and 150mm of travel. This is enough to make landing mid-sized drops comfortable, shrugging off stones and roots in the trail, and help the grippy tyres ensure that you can corner and brake with confidence. They'll be more relaxed in handling than an XC bike, thanks to frames that tend to be longer axle to axle, and with a fork that exits the frame at a slacker angle. Trail hardtails such as the Mantra LSL from Saracen use large volume rear tyres and sturdy forks to ensure you get down the hill with a grin on your face. Thanks to their lower weight, you will usually see air-sprung suspension forks and shocks on a trail bike. These are really easy to adjust and tune to your weight and preferences. The components on these bikes are heavier than you'll get on a cross-country bike, as they're designed to be more durable. The tyres will have bigger knobs, which will make them perform better on loose surfaces, but will roll slower on tarmac. And the brakes will be more powerful, with larger brake rotors, typically around 180 to 200mm. Many will also come with a dropper post, which makes it easy to get the saddle down low so it stays out of the way on descents. A full suspension version will smooth the way, while those who don't mind a rougher ride or want to save a little cash will find plenty of trail hardtails on the market, such as the Mantra LSL. The trail bike will excel on red graded trails and should be fun on off-piste wooded tracks. More experienced riders are going to want to go and ride steeper tracks, however to get the most out of those, you'll want an enduro bike. The Saracen Aerial 60 is a perfect example of an enduro bike. has 160mm of travel at the front and back, ensuring rock gardens, matted routes and steep terrain aren't going to ruin your day. Enduro bikes tend to have between 150 and 170mm of rear wheel travel, with a few exceptions, and most will be full suspension, as when you're tackling the kind of tracks that these bikes are built for, rear suspension rules the roost. Looking at the shape or geometry of the bike, we see slack head angles, that's the angle the fork exits the frame, and steeper seat angles. Imagine a line from the centre of the cranks up to the saddle clamp. This Saracen Aerial 60, for example, has a 64.6 degree head angle and a 76.5 degree seat tube angle. Respectively, this should make descents calmer and climbs a little bit more comfortable. Some bikes even come with adjustable geometry via flip chips in the frame to help fine-tune the shape. Though descents are the priority with these bikes, they're also designed to get back up the hill too, so you'll see wide-range cassettes on the rear wheel to help keep your legs spinning. To ensure that the bikes can handle the rough stuff, expect large tyre knobs made from soft rubber to help them stick to the ground. But as we're hitting higher speeds over those rocks and routes, the tyre sidewalls will be thicker than you'll find on a trail bike to help stop those pesky punctures. Both of these features will slow you down on the ups but will speed you up on the downs. The forks and shocks will be a bit burlier too, but perform more consistently on long descents. You might see coil-sprung rear shocks on some enduro bikes. These offer a supremely supple ride for extra grip, but are harder to set up for your weight. To ensure optimal control, 4-piston brakes with 200 or even 220mm rotors will be spec'd. Some enduro bikes will also use mixed wheel sizes in the front and rear. While 29-inch wheels dominate the mountain bike market, a mixed wheel or mullet bike has a 27.5-inch rear wheel and a 29er front wheel. On bikes with more travel, this can give riders a little more bump clearance on steeper tracks, and some riders like how they corner too. Saracen's small and medium Aerial 60s come as a mullet, ideal for shorter riders, while taller riders can swap to a mullet setup on their large or XL Aerial 60s via a frame chip, a common feature on many enduro bikes. Many bike brands do give the option to run either a full 29 or a mullet setup on their enduro race bikes. Your enduro bike is well placed for tackling black graded trails, whether they're man-made or natural. Steep, janky, tech and fast, the enduro bike loves them all. That's why you'll see loads of enduro bikes on our channel. You have subscribed, haven't you? Now, if descents are all you care about and you have regular access to an uplift, the next two bikes might appeal the most. Much like downcountry bikes, the park bike is very closely related to its two closest siblings, the enduro bike and the downhill bike, and in some cases may be difficult to distinguish, but let's not get too hung up on the details. The park bike is super versatile in a descent-focused way and can come in a range of different forms, which I'll cover in a minute. Park bikes are built with the bike park in mind. Think man-made trails with perfectly sculpted berms, mind-blowing booters, glaring gap jumps, and a whole heap of hillside to play with. The Aerial 80 from Saracen is a prime example. 180mm of travel is provided both via the rear suspension system and the front fork. Saracen use a properly burly single crown fork here, but there are park bikes out there with dual crown forks too. You'll see far more coil shocks on park bikes. They're super durable and the coil spring can offer more mid-stroke support than an air shock, ideal for pumping rollers and boosting jumps. More hidden might be coil springs inside the fork too. They're smooth and supple, but definitely heavier. The Aerial 80 features 27.5-inch wheels front and rear, ensuring the bike should be manoeuvrable in the air. There are tons of mullet park bikes around too. Here we see a wide-ranging cassette to help the Aerial 80 get back to the top, or at least to the gondola queue with minimal suffering. However, don't be surprised to see the odd downhill group set on a park bike too. Some people even run them with a single gear at the back too. Some park bikes also feature dropper posts, making pedaling them a little bit easier. However, if that's not a concern, you might want to consider a downhill bike. It's often said that the downhill bike is the F1 of the mountain bike world, and take a stroll around the pits of a World Cup downhill race and you can see why. Dedicated mechanics, electronic data acquisition, full rebuilds, as well as fresh tyres and wheels every lap. This is the reality of downhill at the highest level. Fortunately, with some smart shopping, if you decide a bike dedicated to the ultimate in downhill speed is for you, you won't need a £500,000 setup to go ride. Downhill bikes are built to go downhill fast, pure and simple. Take this Mist from Saracen as an example. 211mm of rear suspension and 200mm at the front is built to be as sensitive as possible to filter out as many of the small, medium and big hits that are doled out on a downhill track. The most powerful brakes are bolted to super sturdy frames to stop bomb-proof wheels from spinning. The tyres are heavy, but when they're up to speed, they give a tank-like ride that means only the most serious of hits has a chance of giving you a puncture. If you're a geometry geek, then the 63-degree head angle will speak volumes as to its intended use. Saracen's engineers have chosen the Mist, raced to great success by the Madison Saracen factory race team on the World Cup circuit, to run on mullet wheels, with the larger 29-inch front wheel rolling over bumps well and the smaller 27.5-inch wheel offering quick handling and more space out back. Some downhill bikes will come with 29-inch wheels at both ends, but mullets are increasingly popular. As mentioned, the compromise here is that you're not going to be riding up hills on your downhill bike, so make sure you have access to a lift up of some sort or a happy pushing. Right, time for our final bike. This is a dirt jump bike. While the bikes so far have been built for riding at least a couple of kilometres at a time, this next bike might only see use over a 100-metre pump track or a few jumps in the woods. The dirt jump bike's use case is flying over tabletops, doubles and kickers, potentially with a gymnastic-like trick mid-air with a few rollers in between to generate speed. We're firmly back in hardtail territory as the Saracen Amplitude shows, potentially even as a rigid bike with no suspension front or rear. This is because the tracks are smooth and it's your skill and body weight shifts that generate pop. The short travel suspension forks at the front help soften nose-heavy landings. However, they'll often be run stiff, either with their air spring or on more pocket-friendly models, a coil spring. While you might expect to see knobbly rubber, dirt jump bikes often have pretty slick tyres to help zip along and generate speed. Likewise, with no big hills to climb and the likelihood of a few spills along the way, dirt jump bikes only have one gear, much like a BMX. So there we have the key families of mountain bikes. Now, as I said before, there are some grey areas, and as kit gets even more versatile, those grey areas will get even greyer. But I hope that's been a useful introduction to the vast world of mountain bikes. Thanks again to our sponsors Saracen Bikes for making this video possible.